What do Falcons do? We rise up and take a bunch of injuries to either starters or immediate backups right in preseason week 1 and the training camp season. Welcome to Rise Up Reactions, the show where we talk all things Falcons, NFL, Georgia sports, and in general, the sports news of the day. I'm your host, Dr. Lee Denning, the Golden Hard Dog and a lifelong sports fan, and you never expect preseason to show you what your team is really made of. You know, you might expect to see some coaching patterns. You might expect to see a couple of starters here and there. Some teams actually played their starters for a couple of series this week, which I was a little surprised by, but I think they learned from last year with the abridged season to, try and get a little bit of flow going into week 1. But what the Falcons managed to do was lose 3 potential starters, or at least the immediate backups, due to injuries, and all more or less similar injuries. We started off with Rondale Moore, which I made a video on this past Friday where I was talking about, what can we do to replace him? It sucks that he is out, and it sucks that all of these guys are out. I want to be very clear. Horrible that all of them are out. We still don't know the status of one of them that I'm going to talk about. But, Rondale Moore's impact was huge. He was meant to be our wide receiver 3. Definitely think that Darnell Mooney is going to have a bigger role. And we'll see Ray McCloud. He's probably going to step up into that slot role, and the Falcons are still potentially going to be doing some shopping. We'll talk a little bit about the preseason week 1 in general. We'll talk about Michael Penix's performance, which I thought was pretty good. He's got a very weird throwing mechanic, but we'll get to that. But talking about the injuries real quick, we already lost Rondale Moore to practice. Then we play number 2, lose DeMarco Hellams for an unspecified knee injury, has to be carted off the field. He's the one that we don't know about his injury status, but I wanted him to be the starter over Richie Grant. I do not have any faith in Richie Grant. I know it's a contract year for him, but in the first 3 years, I have not seen anything that is not replaceable by anybody else in this league, and I do believe that Hellams was that significant replacement. He was an upgrade as soon as he went in and started getting significant snaps, and I hate that he is potentially down for a little bit of time. I'm hoping it's not as serious as it looked. We don't have an update, which I think is more beneficial than what we have with our 3rd injury, which is to our 3rd round draft pick, Braylon Trice. I was looking forward to seeing him get in the mix. He had 10 sacks, I think, the last 2 seasons, each at Washington, and I was looking forward to seeing him play. It did not end up working out. He went down right as the half was coming to an end, and ended up tearing an ACL. We do know that for sure. He is out for the year. We will get to see his debut in 2025. He is under contract for the next 3 years after this one with the Falcons, so we will get to see some of him, and I hope he has a speedy recovery and is able to get back on track to, having a good and fruitful career, whether it always be with the Falcons or whether he be a journeyman in the NFL. I do wish him the best. ACLs typically take about a year to get back to full playing strength. Most guys, though, these days, because of the surgical interventions, because of the rehab that we do, most guys can probably get back to most of their regular activity within about 6 months, but then to be at like pro-level athlete status, you're looking at 10 to 12 months total from the time you have the injury and surgery. So I anticipate that he'll be going down for surgery probably this week. We don't have an update on that, but that would be my anticipation. So we lost 3 guys that are all potentially starters. I think for sure you're looking at Rondale Moore being the starting slot receiver. You were potentially going to have DeMarco Hellams battling strongly with Richie Grant to be the safety number 2 behind Jesse Bates. And then you have Braylon Trice, who we don't have a dominant edge rusher. He could have very easily worked his way into the starting position, but now he will not even be on the roster this year as he's going on IR immediately. We'll see what DeMarco Hellams' update is once we know something. Let's talk a little bit about the game. I really only watched a lot of the Penix series because everything after that was unwatchable in the second half. But things that I would take note of here. So let's start with the running backs. Jason McClellan, beautiful bruising run to start the game. Virtually nothing else the rest of the way. So I thought he was going to have a lot of explosive potential, but he really didn't show that. Carlos Washington, one of the guys who got a touchdown, he looked better overall. He is the guy who beat out everybody last year to be a practice squad running back. He was a guy that I thought might make the roster. We still haven't seen a lot of Avery Williams. I'm sorry, guys. It's early this morning. But we still haven't seen a ton of Avery Williams. I would expect to see in week 2 Avery Williams, James McClellan, and Carlos Washington really going heavy. All 3 of those guys, plus any of the other practice squad guys, or guys that are probably not going to make the roster. I don't think we'll see a lot of Tyler Algier or Bijan. I think we could see Bijan in like one series, but again, with the injury bug biting, I don't think that first-year head coach Raheem Morris, or first-year Falcons head coach, I should say, Raheem Morris, is going to be overly aggressive with his starters, seeing that we lost some valuable pieces in week 1 of the preseason. Things that you would expect to see mid-season are now happening to the Falcons immediately. Wide receivers, I was not overly impressed with Casey Washington. He had 9 targets, only 3 catches. Some of those were not his fault, but I thought that a guy who was known for being a possession receiver would come down with more of those balls. He had a few that I thought got away from him. And he's a guy that's fighting for a roster spot. I would have thought he was more of a lock, but now you don't know. And then the other thing is Michael Penix. We should talk about him. Michael Penix, it is weird to see a quarterback come out as a left-hander. Let's just start with that. But I expect to see the same motion, the same mechanic in reverse as, say, Mahomes, Stafford, Allen, some of these guys who I think have really pretty throwing motions. Penix has an incredibly strange throwing motion. I cannot say that I've watched a ton of him up until now, just because I didn't watch a lot of Pac-12 football. I watched a little bit of the national championship game, and I didn't see anything that I loved there about him, so I was off of the Penix wagon after that game. But watching him in a Falcons uniform, he just keeps the ball incredibly tight to him. He does not have the ball getting a huge torque coming from the back. He still has a lot of zip on the ball, but his throwing mechanic, I can't envision him having a 45 or 50-yard bomb down the field. Probably accurate, but I don't know that it's going to have the speed it needs to get there. I mean, I'm sure he has the mechanics to do that. We just haven't seen it yet because we've been limited in that action. He hasn't been behind the starting offensive lineman. But again, not a bad showing. Pretty accurate overall. No touchdowns, but I do think that he's a guy that I'd be comfortable stepping in. The rest of the quarterbacks, awful. Rourke even got cut like before we got back to week 2 of the preseason. And we brought in somebody else to potentially battle for a roster spot on the practice squad. We'll see what ends up happening here. I still don't know that we end up going with Taylor Heineke on the roster at all. He could be a casualty down the line here, but again, it depends on what Raheem Morris and Zach Robinson want to do with the quarterback room. I think that it's going to be Kirk right out the gate. I think Kirk needs to see some snaps in the next 2 weeks of preseason. We need to do everything we can to protect him, but absolutely, we do not need to see him shaking rust off in week 1. We need to see him shaking rust off now. I want him to get to game speed before we get to real games. Not the best showing overall for the Falcons. Defense let up some really big plays. But overall, not the worst showing either. I'm encouraged by some of the things I see. I'm less encouraged by other things. It's a bunch of backups and guys that are playing for practice squad spots in week 1. We'll see what happens in week 2 and 3. I expect to see more starters for at least a couple of series here. Again, if nothing else, to shake rust off. Thank you for watching, liking, sharing, and subscribing. We wish the best to all of our downed Falcons with their health and hope that Rondale Moore, Braylon Trice, DeMarco Hellams all make speedy recoveries. DeMarco, we hope that you come back sometime this season. We'll see if the news comes out today, what you suffered. Hopefully it's nothing that ends the year. But thank you, and as always, rise up.